The ballroom of the luxury charity gala glowed like a dream carved from glass and gold, every surface polished to reflect wealth, status, and quiet power. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over marble floors, and the air carried the faint scent of citrus, expensive perfume, and fresh flowers imported that very morning. Guests moved gracefully in tailored suits and flowing gowns, their smiles practiced, their laughter controlled. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Hayes, her pregnancy impossible to hide, her rounded belly resting beneath a silk gown the color of a clear summer sky. One hand rested protectively over her stomach as she accepted congratulations with gentle smiles, her eyes soft but alert, already shaped by the instinct of a mother. Beside her stood Victor Hayes, her husband, a man whose name alone commanded silence in boardrooms across continents. His presence was calm, commanding, almost untouchable, his tailored black suit fitting him like armor. He watched the room with measured confidence, believing, without question, that everything around him was under his control. This night was meant to be perfect, a public display of generosity and power, a reminder that the world bent easily around people like him. Waiters glided across the room carrying silver trays lined with crystal glasses filled with freshly prepared juice, vibrant in color and advertised as organic, pure, and safe, specially selected for Eleanor due to her pregnancy. One of the glasses was placed delicately into her hand, cool against her fingers. She lifted it slowly, the light catching the liquid as it shimmered invitingly. Victor turned slightly, speaking to a donor about an upcoming acquisition, his attention divided, but his confidence unwavering. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing ever did in rooms like this. Near the service entrance, almost invisible against the towering elegance of the space, stood a young girl no one had invited and no one had noticed. Her name was Lena. She was thin, her shoulders slightly hunched as if she had learned long ago to make herself small. Her dress was clean but old, the fabric faded from too many washes, the seams carefully stitched by hand to keep it from falling apart. Her shoes were worn, soles uneven, whispering softly against the marble floor as she shifted her weight nervously. She had been helping in the kitchen earlier, wiping counters, carrying scraps, doing small tasks in exchange for food that might or might not be offered at the end of the night. People like her learned not to ask questions, not to draw attention. But something she had seen moments earlier burned in her chest like fire. She had watched from behind stacked crates as two men near the prep table leaned close, their voices low, urgent. One of them slipped something small and clear into a jug of juice, stirring quickly before sealing it. Lena hadn't known what it was, but she had heard the words spoken in a rushed whisper, the pregnant one, and no trace. Her heart had started pounding so hard she thought it would give her away. Memories she tried to bury rose violently in her mind. Her mother's tired smile, the factory break room, the cup handed to her without suspicion, the ambulance that came too late. Lena's breath shook as she realized what was about to happen. She had told herself to stay quiet. Quiet kept you safe. Quiet kept you alive. But as she watched the waiter lift the tray and head toward the ballroom, toward the woman with the gentle face and the hand on her stomach, something inside Lena broke free from fear. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, her legs trembling as if they might collapse beneath her. The music softened as if the room itself sensed disruption. Eleanor raised the glass closer to her lips, the moment stretching unbearably thin. Lena's voice cut through the air, thin but sharp with desperation. "Please don't drink that." The words landed like shattered glass. Conversation stopped. Smiles froze. The soft clinking of cutlery fell silent. Eleanor's hand halted midair, her heart suddenly racing, eyes snapping toward the sound. Victor turned sharply, irritation flashing across his face as he searched for the source of the interruption. His gaze landed on Lena, and confusion twisted quickly into annoyance. She did not belong here. Everyone could see that. Security began to move instinctively, trained to eliminate disruptions before they grew. Lena felt their presence closing in, panic flooding her chest, but she forced herself to speak again. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "I know I shouldn't be here. But that juice, it's not safe. I saw them put something in it." A ripple of whispers spread across the room, disbelief mixing with curiosity. Victor stepped forward, his expression hardening. "This is unacceptable," he said coldly. Who let her in? Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away from Eleanor. I help in the kitchen sometimes, she whispered. They don't notice me, but I saw it. Please believe me. Eleanor felt a chill move through her despite the warmth of the room. Her fingers tightened around the glass before she slowly lowered it. She looked at Lena not as a disruption, but as a person, as a frightened child standing alone against a room full of power. Victor gestured sharply to security. Take the glass, he ordered, his voice firm. And remove her. Guards stepped closer, but Eleanor spoke, her voice soft yet steady. Wait. The single word carried authority no one expected. Victor turned toward her, surprised. Eleanor met his eyes, then looked back at Lena. Why would someone do this? She asked gently. Lena swallowed, her hands trembling. I heard them say the baby, she replied. That it was the reason. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. Victor's confidence cracked, just slightly, as fear crept in where certainty had lived. And in that moment, before proof, before answers, before consequences, everything changed. The private side room felt miles away from the glittering ballroom, though it was only a few steps down the hall, sealed off by heavy doors and guarded silence. The hum of celebration had been replaced by a tense stillness that pressed against the walls. Victor Hayes stood near the wide window overlooking the city, his back straight but his shoulders rigid, hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Below him, the city lights glittered indifferently, unaware of how close his world had come to shattering. Eleanor sat on a velvet sofa, her posture composed but her face pale, both hands resting over her stomach as if she could shield the life inside her through sheer will. Lena stood near the door, flanked by security, her eyes darting nervously around the room, her body tense like a trapped animal. She had expected to be thrown out, yelled at, maybe punished for speaking out of turn. Instead, she was here, surrounded by wealth and power that felt suffocating rather than comforting. The glass of juice had been sealed in a sterile container and rushed to an on-site lab, normally used for high-profile events and VIP safety checks. Every passing second stretched unbearably long. Victor broke the silence, his voice controlled but sharp. Do you realize what you've done? He asked, not turning around. Lena flinched at the sound of his voice. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Eleanor looked up then, her eyes gentle but searching. You didn't, she said softly. If you're wrong, we lose nothing. If you're right, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The weight of it hung heavily in the room. Victor turned slowly, his gaze falling on Lena. He studied her properly now, not as an interruption, but as a person. She was younger than he'd first thought, her face marked by a seriousness no child should carry. What exactly did you see? He asked. Lena swallowed hard, forcing herself to remember every detail. Two men near the prep table, she said quietly. One of them took out a small bottle. Clear. He poured it into the jug when no one was looking. They said it wouldn't be noticed. That no one checks juice. Her voice cracked slightly. They said it would look like an accident. Eleanor felt her breath hitch, a hand flying instinctively to her mouth. Victor's jaw tightened as anger began to simmer beneath his controlled exterior. Accidents could be dismissed. Accidents couldn't be blamed. He knew exactly what that meant. Minutes later, the door opened, and the head of security stepped in, his expression grim. The room seemed to lean forward, as if even the walls were listening. Sir, he said quietly, the preliminary test is positive. Victor felt his stomach drop. Positive for what? He asked, his voice barely steady. A chemical compound, the man replied. Colorless, tasteless, fast-acting. In adults, it would cause mild dizziness at most. But for a developing fetus, he hesitated. Eleanor's hands tightened over her belly. It could cause severe complications, he continued. Miscarriage is highly likely. The words slammed into Victor like a physical blow. His vision blurred, his chest tightening as if he couldn't draw enough air. He looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, and imagined the future he had almost lost, the child he had already named in his heart, the life he had planned with absolute certainty. And he realized how close he had come to watching it disappear without ever knowing why. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed silently down her face as she leaned forward, shaking. Victor crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt in front of her, taking her hands, pressing them to his forehead. I'm here, he whispered, his voice breaking. You're safe. The baby is safe. The words felt fragile, like they might shatter if spoken too loudly. Lena watched from the doorway, her own eyes filling with tears as guilt and fear twisted inside her. She wondered if she had made things worse, if she had brought pain instead of preventing it. Victor stood slowly and turned toward Lena. She stiffened, bracing herself. Instead of anger, she saw something else in his eyes, raw emotion, unguarded and overwhelming. He walked toward her, his expensive shoes silent against the carpet, and then, to the shock of everyone in the room, he lowered himself until he was kneeling in front of her. Lena's breath caught in her throat. No adult had ever done that for her. "You saved my child," Victor said, his voice hoarse. The words trembled as they left him, carrying the weight of everything he had almost lost. "Do you understand that?" Lena shook her head slightly, tears spilling over now. "I just didn't want it to happen again," she whispered. "Not to someone else." Victor frowned gently. "Again?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then spoke, the words spilling out as if they had been waiting for years. "My mother," she said. "She was pregnant. She worked long hours. One day she drank something at work. They said it was nothing. She got sick. She never came home." Her shoulders shook as she continued. "My brother never had a chance." The room fell into a heavy, reverent silence. Eleanor covered her mouth, sobbing openly now, her heart breaking for the girl in front of her. Victor felt something inside him crack wide open. All his wealth, all his power, and he hadn't been able to protect a child like this from suffering. Yet this same child had protected his family without hesitation. Victor reached out slowly, gently taking Lena's small hand in his. "You are brave," he said softly. "Braver than most adults I know." Lena looked up at him, stunned, as if she didn't recognize the word. No one had ever called her that before. He turned to security. "She is not to be treated as a suspect," he said firmly. "She is our guest." The guards nodded, stepping back. Victor looked back at Lena, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're not invisible," he said quietly. "Not to us. Not anymore." For the first time since she could remember, Lena felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. A fragile, terrifying sense of safety. The days that followed unfolded quietly, almost cautiously, as if everyone inside the Hayes estate was afraid that sudden movement might break the fragile sense of safety that had settled over them. The gala was never mentioned publicly beyond a vague statement about a security concern, but behind closed doors, Victor Hayes set forces in motion with a precision that only years of commanding empires could create. Investigators were brought in discreetly, phones were tapped, security footage reviewed frame by frame, and staff interviews conducted without raising suspicion. Victor worked late into the night, his face hardened with purpose, yet something in him had changed. Each time his gaze drifted toward Eleanor, resting peacefully with her hand over her belly, or toward Lena, sitting quietly at the edge of a room, as if unsure she was allowed to exist there, his resolve deepened. This was no longer just about protecting his power or reputation. It was about protecting life. Lena had been given a small guest room at the far end of the estate, a space that felt unreal to her. The bed was soft in a way she had never experienced, the sheets clean and warm, the walls painted a calming shade of cream. The first night, she barely slept, convinced someone would wake her and tell her it had all been a mistake. She sat curled on the bed, listening to the unfamiliar silence, her thoughts circling back to the moment in the ballroom when she had spoken out. Part of her still expected punishment. Instead, the next morning, a knock came at her door, gentle and unhurried. Eleanor stood there, holding a tray of food and wearing a soft smile that carried no pity, only warmth. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. Lena nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. They sat together in quiet companionship, the kind that didn't demand explanations. For the first time in years, Lena ate without fear that the food would be taken away as the investigation progressed. Truths surfaced that sent waves of anger through Victor. The poisoning attempt traced back to a business partner he had trusted for over a decade, a man who had smiled at him across conference tables while quietly resenting the unborn child that threatened to shift power dynamics. Money had changed hands. Promises had been made. The betrayal cut deeper than any hostile takeover ever had. Arrests were made discreetly, legal proceedings set in motion with airtight precision. Victor felt no satisfaction in it, only exhaustion. Only the chilling realization that danger had come from within his carefully guarded circle. While the world outside remained unaware, life inside the estate softened in unexpected ways. Eleanor insisted that Lena join her during afternoon walks in the garden. At first, Lena followed a step behind, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, afraid to tread on perfectly trimmed grass or touch anything too beautiful. Eleanor slowed her pace to match Lena's, speaking gently about small things, the way the roses bloomed earlier that year, how the baby seemed to respond to music, how fear could linger even after danger passed. Lena listened, absorbing every word, her guarded heart slowly loosening. One afternoon, Eleanor placed Lena's hand on her belly without warning. Lena froze, then gasped softly as she felt a strong kick from inside. Tears filled her eyes. "He's strong," she whispered. Eleanor smiled. "He is. And he's alive because of you." Victor observed these moments from a distance at first, unsure how to enter a space shaped by vulnerability. He had always solved problems with decisiveness and control, not quiet presence. Yet one evening, he found Lena sitting alone in the library, staring at a shelf of books she didn't dare touch. "You can read any of them," he said gently. Lena startled, standing up too quickly. "I don't want to break anything," she said. Victor felt an unexpected ache in his chest. "You won't," he replied. "They're just books." He pulled one from the shelf and handed it to her. Lena traced the cover as if it were something sacred. "Did you go to school?" Victor asked. Lena shook her head. "Only sometimes," she admitted. "When my mother was alive." The words hung between them. Victor nodded slowly. "That can change," he said. From that day on, tutors were quietly arranged. Doctors checked Lena's health. New clothes appeared in her room without explanation. Each kindness felt overwhelming to her. Yet Victor noticed how her posture slowly straightened, how her eyes began to hold curiosity instead of constant fear. One evening, Victor asked Lena to walk with him in the garden as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The estate was quiet. The world narrowed to the sound of footsteps on stone paths and distant birds settling for the night. "I used to believe strength meant never needing help," Victor said, breaking the silence. Never showing fear. He stopped walking and turned to her. "But you stood in a room full of powerful people and spoke the truth, knowing no one would protect you if it went wrong." Lena looked down at her hands. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I was more scared of staying quiet." Victor felt his throat tighten. "You changed something in me," he said honestly. "You reminded me of a responsibility I forgot." He gestured toward the house behind them. "Not just to my family, to people who never get hurt." Lena looked up at him, her eyes shining with something close to hope. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. Victor shook his head. "You are not a burden," he replied firmly. "You are a reminder." That night, Victor made decisions that would ripple far beyond the estate walls. He restructured company policies, demanded safety protocols where none had existed, funded shelters and education programs without attaching his name. Not for image, for accountability. When Eleanor felt the baby kick strongly that night, stronger than before, Victor dropped to his knees beside the bed, overcome by emotion he no longer tried to hide. Tears streamed down his face as he pressed his forehead against her hand. "We almost lost him," he whispered. Eleanor brushed her fingers through his hair. "But we didn't," she said, "because someone chose courage." Outside the bedroom door, Lena stood silently, listening. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling it beat steady and strong, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that her future might hold more than survival. The morning the baby was born arrived quietly, without drama, as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath in reverence. Soft light filtered through the tall hospital windows, casting pale gold reflections across polished floors and white walls that smelled faintly of antiseptic and calm. Eleanor lay exhausted but peaceful, her face glowing with a mixture of relief, pain, and overwhelming love. In her arms rested a small bundle wrapped in blue, a tiny life breathing steadily, unaware of how close it had come to never drawing its first breath. Victor stood beside the bed, his hand resting gently on Eleanor's shoulder, his other hand trembling as he reached out to touch his son's tiny fingers. The moment shattered something deep inside him. Tears slipped freely down his face, unrestrained and unashamed. He had signed billion-dollar deals without blinking, faced down rivals without fear, but this reduced him to something raw and human. "You're here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're alive." Each word felt like a prayer answered. The room was filled with a quiet, sacred stillness, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the baby's gentle breaths. Lena stood near the doorway, unsure if she should step inside. She wore a simple, clean dress Eleanor had chosen for her hair neatly brushed, her hands folded tightly together. She felt like a guest in a miracle, afraid that moving too close might make it vanish. Eleanor noticed her hesitation and smiled weakly. "Come here," she said softly. Lena froze, then took a few careful steps forward. Eleanor shifted the baby slightly and reached out, taking Lena's hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. "He's alive because of you," Eleanor said, her eyes shining with tears. "You gave him a chance to be here." Lena's breath caught, and she shook her head in disbelief. "I just said something," she whispered. Victor turned toward her then, his eyes red, his composure completely gone. "You did more than that," he said. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my family." Victor gently pulled Lena into an embrace, holding her as if she were something fragile and precious. Lena stiffened at first, and used to being held without fear, then slowly relaxed, her face pressed against his chest as quiet sobs escaped her. Victor held her tighter, his own tears soaking into her hair. In that moment, the difference between billionaire and poor girl disappeared entirely. There were only two human beings, bound by gratitude and grace. Eleanor watched them, her heart full in a way she had never known, sensing that her family had grown in ways she hadn't planned but deeply needed. After the nurses stepped out, Victor took a deep breath and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a neatly folded set of papers. His hands shook as he held them. "I wanted to wait," he said quietly, looking at Eleanor, then back at Lena. "But every moment I waited felt wrong." Lena looked at the papers, confused. "What are those?" she asked softly. Victor swallowed, his voice barely steady. "They're adoption papers," he said. "If you want them to be." The words hung in the air, fragile and powerful. Lena's mind reeled. Adoption. Family. Home. Words she had never allowed herself to imagine. Tears flooded her eyes as she looked from Victor to Eleanor, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that would tell her this wasn't real. Instead, Eleanor smiled and nodded, her gaze filled with certainty. "We want you with us," she said gently. "Not because we owe you, because we love you." Lena's knees nearly gave out as the weight of the moment crashed over her. She nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming freely down her face. Victor pulled her into another embrace, this one stronger, protective, his shoulders shaking as he finally allowed himself to break completely. The man who controlled empires cried openly, not from loss, but from a gratitude so deep it hurt. He pressed his forehead against Lena's and whispered, "You didn't just save my son. You saved me." Lena closed her eyes, holding on to him, feeling something settle inside her that had been missing her entire life. A sense of belonging. In the weeks that followed, life found a new rhythm. The estate echoed with the soft cries of a newborn and the quiet laughter of a girl learning what it meant to feel safe. Lena started school, her excitement contagious as she shared stories at dinner, her voice growing more confident each day. Victor attended her school events with the same seriousness he once reserved for board meetings, sitting in the front row, clapping the loudest. Eleanor watched her children, both of them now, with a heart full of awe. The boy who had been protected by courage, and the girl whose courage had changed everything. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Victor stood in the nursery, watching Lena rock her baby brother gently. The room was bathed in warm light, the walls painted with soft colors chosen with care. Victor felt tears well up again, unashamed. He understood now that wealth had never been his greatest legacy. This was a life saved, a family formed, a reminder that sometimes the smallest voice, spoken at the right moment, carries the power to change destinies. And as the baby stirred softly and Lena smiled down at him, Victor knew that no success he would ever achieve could compare to the miracle that had brought him to tears, the miracle of a poor girl who refused to stay silent, and, in doing so, gave them all a future.